Hey everyone, welcome back. We're doing a deep dive today into this podcast transcript, all about getting better at English fluency.
Yeah, fluency.
And I think this one, even if you consider yourself like pretty fluent already, I think there are some really interesting points here that would help anyone
For sure.
with their communication skills, no matter what language you speak.
Absolutely. And you know how sometimes you listen to advice and you're like, okay, that's great, but like, how do I actually use this?
Right.
I think that's what we're going to be kind of breaking down today.
Yeah.
Taking those nuggets and figuring out how we can use them.
I love that.
Okay.
So one of the things that this podcast really hit on, and I was really happy to hear this, is that fluency is not about speaking perfectly.
Yes.
They were really emphasizing that it's more about confident communication.
Communication. Yeah.
And I mean, think about it. Native speakers make mistakes all the time, right?
All the time.
Does that make them any less fluent?
No, not at all. And you know, you could spend years learning all the perfect grammar and all the perfect vocabulary.
Right. But if you're too afraid to speak, what's the point?
Right.
And so I think that what this podcast was arguing is if you can get your point across with energy and with connection, a few grammatical errors here and there aren't going to matter.
Yeah. I love that point. I'm imagining like someone who is grammatically perfect, but they speak in a monotone.
Right.
You know, no emotion.
Exactly.
Versus someone who maybe makes a couple of mistakes, but is like clearly passionate and engaged.
Yes.
Who would you rather listen to?
It's the difference between focusing on accuracy versus fluency.
Yes.
And I think that a lot of times the first step to sounding more fluent is actually just like letting go of the need to be perfect.
It's so much easier said than done, though, right?
Absolutely.
Like I remember when I was learning Spanish, I was so worried about sounding like wrong
Oh, yeah.
that I wouldn't even try to speak.
I get it. And that's why they talk a lot about this idea of immersion in this podcast.
Okay.
Now, they weren't saying like you need to move to, an English-speaking country. Right.
But they were saying that you can create that immersive environment wherever you are.
I like that. I've always heard about immersion, but I think it always felt a little intimidating to me.
Sure.
Like, oh my gosh, that's such a big lifestyle change.
Yeah.
What does that actually look like in practice?
So think of it like layers.
Okay.
Right? And each one kind of builds on top of the other. So the first layer is what I call passive immersion.
Okay.
And this is where you are surrounding yourself with the language, but maybe in the background.
Okay.
You're listening to podcasts. Maybe you've got music on. You're listening to audiobooks. You're not actively studying.
Right.
But you're starting to familiarize your ear with just the sounds of English.
Right. That's like you're absorbing it subconsciously almost.
Exactly.
Okay. So what comes after passive immersion?
So after that, you have active immersion.
Okay.
And this is where you are engaging with the language more directly. So you're watching a show with the subtitles on. You're really trying to understand the dialogue. Maybe you're even repeating some of the phrases to yourself.
Okay.
But you're really trying to like decode and use the language.
I think that's a really good point. I definitely found that when I was learning other languages, watching movies
Yes.
really helped me pick up vocabulary and even slang that I wouldn't have gotten from like a textbook.
For sure. And it's fun.
Yeah, exactly.
And then also, we can't forget about digital immersion, right?
Oh, yeah.
We have all these apps now and all these online communities and even virtual reality things
It's true.
that you can use.
There's so many options these days.
There really are.
So, okay, let's say you're doing all this immersion. You're taking in all this English. What's the next piece?
So after you're taking in all that input, you need to pair it with something equally important,
Okay.
and that is active listening.
Okay.
This podcast really stressed that it's not just about hearing the words,
Mm-hmm.
but it's about understanding the context, the tone,
Right.
all those kind of subtle cues that native speakers use.
It's funny. We tell people to listen actively all the time.
Yeah.
But I don't know if we always explain what that actually means.
Right?
It sounds great.
Yeah.
But like, how do you actually train yourself to do that?
So there are a few techniques that can be really helpful. One is focusing on keywords.
Okay.
So instead of trying to process every single word that someone is saying,
Yeah.
you're really just trying to pick out the most important ones in each sentence.
Okay.
It forces you to really hone in on the meaning.
So you're like mentally highlighting as you go.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, interesting. What else?
Another one is prediction. So as you're listening,
Okay.
you can try to anticipate what the speaker might say next based on the context.
Okay.
So it's almost like turning it into a game.
Yeah.
But it helps you to stay engaged and actively thinking.
I like that because then your brain can't just like zone out.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So focusing on keywords, prediction, Any other tips for becoming like an active listening champion?
One more is rephrasing. So after someone says something, you can try to summarize it in your own words
Okay.
or explain it as if you were telling it to somebody else.
Right.
And it's a really simple but effective way to kind of test your comprehension
Yeah, I like that.
and make sure you're really getting it.
Okay, those are really helpful tips.
Yeah.
I think we can all agree we should be active listeners, but now we have some actual strategies to try.
Exactly.
And you know what? This all ties in with another big theme from this podcast.
What's that?
Confidence building,
Oh, yeah.
the dreaded C word.
I know so many language learners struggle with that.
Yeah.
But it's so important.
Absolutely. And they were saying fear is like the biggest enemy of fluency.
Yes.
And I can totally relate to that. I've had so many times where I knew what I wanted to say in English, but the fear of messing up just like completely froze me.
I think that's a pretty universal experience.
Yeah.
But you know, the thing is, everybody makes mistakes, especially when they're learning something new. And so I think the key is to shift your perspective and view these mistakes not as failures,
Okay.
but as stepping stones
I love that.
on your path to fluency.
Instead of beating yourself up over it, celebrate it as like, hey, I'm pushing myself outside my comfort zone.
Exactly.
Which, speaking of pushing myself outside my comfort zone, reminds me of this time I was trying to order a coffee in Italian.
Oh, tell me more. I have a feeling this is going to be good.
Okay, so picture this. I'm in Rome. I'm dying for a cappuccino.
Okay.
And I've been practicing my Italian ordering phrases for weeks.
Okay.
I walk to the counter feeling all confident, and I completely butcher the pronunciation.
Oh, no.
I ended up with a glass of water
Oh, my gosh.
and a very confused barista.
I can only imagine the look on his face.
Talk about a confidence killer.
I know, but you know what's important is that you tried.
Yeah?
And even though it didn't go as planned, you probably learned more from that experience than you would have from 100 perfectly executed textbook phrases.
It's like you can't let those little stumbles stop you.
You can't.
You got to embrace the awkwardness and keep going.
Keep going.
And that brings us to the practical side of things. Like, what are some concrete steps people can take
Yes.
to boost their confidence when speaking English?
So they had some great tips for this in this podcast. One that they emphasized was mirror practice.
Okay.
So I know it might feel a little silly, but talking to yourself in the mirror can actually be really helpful
Okay.
because it lets you get comfortable with the sound of your own voice speaking English, and you can experiment with different phrases and expressions without the pressure of like an audience.
I've actually tried that before, and it's funny how different you sound to yourself
Oh, yeah.
when you're speaking out loud versus just like in your head.
Right.
It's like, oh, I can hear myself hesitate there.
Yeah.
I can work on smoothing that out.
Exactly. And as you do it, you start to notice yourself getting more and more confident.
Yeah.
Another technique that they recommended was recording yourself speaking English.
Uh-huh.
Now, I know this can be a little cringy, but listening back to a recording can be super insightful because you can pinpoint areas where you might need to improve, like pronunciation or grammar.
Yeah.
And you can also track your progress over time.
It's like having your own personal coach.
Exactly.
Right in your pocket.
Yes.
And speaking of coaches, there's always the classic language exchange.
Yes.
Finding a partner who's learning your native language, you can help each other practice.
Language exchanges are great because you get to actually use the language in a real, authentic way. And it doesn't have to be like formal lessons or anything. You can just talk about your hobbies, your culture, your dreams for the future, whatever.
It's about making it feel less like studying and more like just hanging out.
Exactly.
Yeah. Which brings us to something else that this podcast touched on.
What's that?
Real-world communication skills.
Okay.
You know, it's one thing to know all the grammar and vocabulary, but it's another to actually be able to navigate those everyday interactions.
Oh, wait.
Like, you know, handling small talk, expressing your opinion, understanding different accents.
Yes. They actually specifically mentioned the challenge of small talk,
Uh-huh.
which I know for a lot of people, it can feel really unnatural and formulaic.
Yes, especially when you're learning it from like a textbook.
Yeah.
It's like, who actually says, how do you do in real life?
Nobody.
Right.
It's so stiff.
Yeah, so how do you make small talk feel less, well, small?
Well, the key, according to this podcast, is to go beyond those canned phrases.
Okay.
And really look for ways to connect authentically with the other person.
Okay, you do that.
So it all starts with finding some common ground.
Okay.
Look for something you can both relate to, something that's relevant to the situation.
Okay.
Maybe you're both waiting for the bus. You can comment on how crazy the weather is.
Right.
Or you're at a party and you can mention something interesting that you overheard. The point is to open the conversation in a way that feels genuine and that invites a response.
Okay, so start with something relatable, something that sparks a little bit of connection.
Exactly.
What comes after that initial icebreaker?
So then that's where the open-ended questions come in.
Okay.
So instead of asking questions that can be answered with a simple yes or no,
Right.
ask questions that encourage the other person to kind of elaborate and share their thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
It not only keeps the conversation flowing, but it shows that you're genuinely interested in what they have to say.
So instead of saying, do you like this music? You could say, what do you think of this band?
Exactly.
That opens it up so much more.
Yes, and as they're talking, practice those active listening skills that we talked about earlier.
Okay.
Pay attention to their words, their tone of voice, their body language.
Right.
It'll give you clues about what they're really interested in,
Uh-huh.
and it'll help you to ask kind of relevant follow-up questions
Okay.
to keep that conversation engaging.
It's almost like a dance, isn't it?
It is.
You're both contributing, building on each other's energy.
Yes.
And you create this little world, even if it's just for a few minutes.
And those seemingly insignificant moments of connection
Yeah.
can actually be huge confidence boosters.
Especially when you're learning a new language.
Yes. It shows you that you can communicate, you can build rapport,
Right?
and you can make yourself understood,
Yeah.
even if you aren't speaking perfectly.
And then that boost in confidence makes you want to keep practicing and keep pushing yourself,
Exactly.
which leads to even more fluency.
It's like this upward spiral.
Yeah, it is. It all comes back to that key message from this podcast.
Yeah.
Fluency is not a destination. It's a journey.
It's a journey.
A journey filled with twists and turns.
Yes.
Highs and lows.
And stumbles.
Yeah. And speaking of stumbles, they also said something that really resonated with me. Being understood is more important than being perfect.
Ah, I love that.
This is a powerful reminder, I think, for anyone learning a language or, frankly, anyone trying to communicate effectively in any situation.
It takes the pressure off.
Yeah.
It allows you to focus on the real purpose of communication,
Which
which is connecting with others, sharing ideas,
yeah.
building relationships.
And it's that connection, that feeling of being understood that makes the whole journey so worthwhile.
Absolutely. And it's what keeps us coming back for more,
Yeah,
even when we feel like giving up. Yeah, and it really does take the pressure off, doesn't it?
totally. It allows you to focus on, like, the real purpose of communication.
Right.
You know, connecting with others, sharing ideas, building relationships.
Yeah, and it's that connection, that feeling of being understood that makes the whole journey so worthwhile.
You know, as we're talking about this, it's making me realize that a lot of these principles about not just to learning English,
Oh, for sure.
but to communication in general, like even in our native languages.
Absolutely.
I mean, how often do we hold back from expressing ourselves fully,
Yeah.
even in our own language,
Yes.
because we're afraid of being judged
Oh, yeah.
or not sounding smart enough or eloquent enough or whatever?
All the time.
It's almost like we're so focused on like projecting this perfect image of ourselves
Right.
that we kind of forget that the whole point of communication is to be real,
Yeah.
to be vulnerable, to let people see who we really are, flaws and all.
And that's where I think that idea of letting go of perfectionism becomes so crucial, not just in language learning, but in every aspect of our lives.
Yeah.
You know, it's not about lowering our standards,
Right.
but it's about recognizing that, you know, true connection comes from authenticity,
Totally.
from being willing to be ourselves, even when we're not feeling, you know, 100% polished and perfect.
It's like giving ourselves permission to be human.
Exactly. And that applies to everything from the way we speak to the way we listen,
Yeah.
to the way we handle those everyday interactions, whether it's, you know, making small talk with a stranger at the coffee shop or having a heart-to-heart conversation with a loved one.
So if we could distill all of this down into like a single piece of advice for our listeners, what would it be? What's the one thing that can help us all become more fluent, more confident?
I think it boils down to this: embrace the journey.
Okay.
Embrace the messiness, the imperfections, the moments of awkward silence, the times when you feel like you're fumbling for the right words.
Because those are the moments where the real learning happens.
Exactly. And those moments, as uncomfortable as they may feel in the moment, are what ultimately shape us into, you know, more confident, more compassionate, more connected human beings.
So true. Well said. And on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive.
Okay.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from the power of active listening to the importance of confidence building, to the magic of finding connection through even the smallest of interactions.
It's been a fascinating exploration, and we hope that you, our listener, have gleaned some valuable insights and actionable strategies that you can apply to your own communication journey.
Remember, the key is to keep practicing. Keep experimenting and keep that conversation flowing.
Yes.
And most importantly, don't be afraid to have fun along the way. Until next time.
Keep those conversations flowing.
You know, it's funny. We often think about fluency as like this big, impressive thing. But really, it's all about those small moments of connection.
Absolutely.
You know, it's about being able to share a laugh with someone. To offer a genuine compliment. To ask a thoughtful question that shows you're truly listening.
It's those little sparks of understanding that add up to create something truly meaningful.
And they happen all the time, whether we're speaking our native language or venturing into a new one.
For sure.
I think sometimes we get so caught up in the technical aspects of language, like the grammar, the vocabulary, pronunciation, that we forget about the heart of it all, which is human connection.
And that's where I think those seemingly soft skills become so important. Empathy, active listening, the ability to kind of read between the lines and understand what's not being said. Those are the things that allow us to connect on a deeper level and build those lasting relationships regardless of language barriers.
It's almost like the more we focus on connecting with others, the less we worry about sounding perfect.
Exactly.
And ironically, the more fluent and confident we become.
It's a beautiful paradox, isn't it? When we let go of the pressure to perform, we open ourselves up to that joy of genuine communication.
And that joy is contagious.
It is.
It makes us want to keep practicing, keep learning, keep pushing ourselves outside that comfort zone.
Which is ultimately what fluency is all about, right? It's that willingness to embrace the journey, to celebrate the wins, to learn from the stumbles, and to never stop exploring those infinite possibilities of human connection.
To our listeners out there, wherever you are on your language learning journey, or even if you're just looking to become a more confident and effective communicator in your own language, remember, fluency is not a destination. It's an ongoing adventure. Embrace the challenge, be kind to yourself, and never stop exploring that amazing power of language to connect, inspire, and transform.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll leave you with a final thought to ponder. What's one small but meaningful step you can take this week to nurture your own fluency journey?
Ooh, I like that.
It could be anything. Striking up a conversation with a stranger, trying out a new phrase, or simply paying attention to the way others communicate. And finding inspiration in their style. Remember, every step, no matter how small, brings you closer to unlocking that magic of fluent and confident communication.
Until next time, keep those conversations flowing.